I never thought I'd be in this situation. I've read so many of these posts, thinking, wow, that sucks, but at least it's not me. Well, karma must have been listening, because here I am, sitting in my living room, typing this out while trying to piece my life back together. A little background to set the stage. My girlfriend, Emily, and I have been together for 3 years. We've been living together for about a year in a cozy little apartment downtown. She's gorgeous, smart, and has this ability to light up a room with her smile. I used to think I was the luckiest guy alive. For the last few months, Emily had been hyper-focused on passing her driving test. She failed twice before, mostly due to nerves, and it really shook her confidence. I tried to be supportive, driving her to practice sessions, offering tips, even sitting through hours of YouTube videos about parallel parking. I joked that I'd start charging her hourly rates if she didn't pass soon, and she'd laugh it off, saying she'd pass next time. This is where Jake comes in. Jake and I have been friends for about 2 years. We met at work, bonded over football, and he became a regular in my life. We grabbed beers, watched games, and even played on the same local soccer team. He was funny, outgoing, and always seemed like the kind of guy who had your back. When Emily started looking for a driving instructor who could give her some extra practice, it seemed like a no-brainer to suggest Jake. He worked as a part-time instructor, and I trusted him completely. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily seemed relieved to have someone patient to help her work through her anxiety behind the wheel. Jake was enthusiastic about helping, even texting me updates after their lessons. "She's improving," he said once. "Just needs to nail her parallel parking." I felt good about it, like I was helping her by involving someone I trusted. But then, small things started to feel off. For one, Emily began putting more effort into her appearance before her lessons. Normally, she'd throw on sweats and call it a day, but suddenly, she was doing her hair and makeup before heading out. "I just want to feel confident," she'd say with a shrug. I didn't think much of it at first. Confidence is key, right? Then, she started talking about Jake more. "He's so patient," she'd say. "I wish all instructors were like him. He's just so understanding." Now, don't get me wrong, compliments are fine. I mean, Jake was a good instructor, and I was happy she felt comfortable learning from him. But the way she said it, there was something in her tone, a little too much admiration. I brushed it off as paranoia at first. After all, Jake was my friend, and Emily was my girlfriend. I trusted them both. The first real red flag came after her third driving lesson. She came home looking frazzled, her hair a mess, her shirt a little wrinkled, and gave me this vague story about the car breaking down. She said they'd had to wait for roadside assistance, which explained why she was late. I wanted to believe her. But something about the way she avoided eye contact made my gut twist. Then there was Jake. The next day at work, he was acting weird. Usually, he'd crack jokes or suggest grabbing lunch, but he avoided me entirely. He kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and rushed through the day like he couldn't wait to leave. It was like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, my brain wouldn't shut up. Why was Emily so frazzled? Why was Jake acting like he owed me money? Was I imagining things? The doubts started eating away at me, so I decided to keep an eye out. The next few weeks only made things worse. Emily started canceling plans last minute, saying she was too tired, or too stressed. But then, a couple of times, I'd hear her giggling on the phone in the other room. She'd hang up abruptly when I walked in and give me this overly sweet smile, like she was trying to overcompensate for something. Then there was Jake. He started avoiding me completely. No more texts, no more beers, no more anything. He wasn't just distant, he was actively dodging me. At this point, my gut was practically screaming at me to dig deeper. The breaking point came last Thursday. Emily had her 4th attempt at the driving test, and she failed again. She came home visibly upset, muttering about how the examiner was unfair, and how she'd never get her license. I tried to comfort her, but she snapped at me, saying I didn't understand how much pressure she was under. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, the weird vibes, the excuses, the lies that didn't quite add up. So, I did something I'd never done before. I snooped. Emily's phone was on the kitchen counter, charging. I felt sick to my stomach as I picked it up, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion anymore. I unlocked it and opened her messages. That's when I saw it. That night, my suspicions got the better of me. Emily had been acting distant for weeks, and after her third failed driving test, she was uncharacteristically upset, not just disappointed, but defensive when I tried to comfort her. It was like she wanted me to leave her alone entirely. While she showered, I spotted her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a notification. I knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't let me look away. I stared at it, debating with myself, until curiosity and desperation got the better of me. I unlocked her phone. At first, I didn't see anything unusual in her recent texts. I scrolled through her conversations, feeling almost guilty for doubting her, until I realized something odd. Jake's name wasn't anywhere in her messages. Not a single text, despite the fact that he'd been her driving instructor and was supposedly helping her almost every week. That's when it hit me, she must have deleted them. My heart sank. People don't erase messages unless they have something to hide. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my chest. I dug deeper, opening her recently deleted folder, and that's when I found it. The first message was from Jake. "You were amazing today, as always. Don't stress about the test, you'll get it next time. Let's practice again soon, winking face. And then Emily's reply. "You're too sweet. Thanks for everything, Jake. You always know how to make me feel better, Red Heart." I froze. The messages weren't explicit, but they felt way too flirty for a professional driving instructor, or for someone who's supposed to be my friend. My mind raced as I kept scrolling, my chest tightening with every word. "Jake, today was fun. Same time next week? Or sooner if you want." Emily. Sooner, winking face. "I'll see what I can do." The final nail in the coffin was a message from Jake that was unmistakable. "We've got to be careful. If my name finds out, it'll ruin everything." Ruin everything. My jaw clenched as the weight of those words sank in. They weren't just being flirty, they were hiding something. At that moment, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My girlfriend and my friend, two people I trusted more than anyone, were sneaking around behind my back. I didn't even know how far things had gone, but the fact that they were conspiring to keep it a secret was enough to make my blood boil. I put her phone back exactly where I found it and paced the apartment, my mind spinning. Confronting her right then and there felt tempting, but I knew I needed more proof. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about protecting myself from any excuses she might come up with. By the time Emily got out of the shower, I was back on the couch, pretending to watch TV. She smiled at me as if nothing was wrong, her hair wrapped in a towel, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I stared at her, wondering how she could act so normal, so innocent, while betraying me behind my back. That night I barely slept. I lay awake, replaying the messages in my head, trying to convince myself there had to be some other explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. The two people I trusted most were hiding something from me. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. By the next morning, my anger had crystallized into something sharper, a determination to get the truth. Those texts confirmed my worst fears, but I needed to know just how deep their betrayal went. Confronting Emily or Jake without solid proof felt pointless. I wanted something undeniable, something neither of them could worm their way out of. Emily had another driving lesson scheduled that afternoon, and I decided to follow her. She left the apartment a little after 1 p.m., dressed far too nicely for what was supposed to be a driving practice session. Tight jeans, a low-cut blouse, and makeup that looked more suited for a night out than a test track. I clenched my jaw but said nothing as she grabbed her bag and headed out. "Good luck," I called after her, forcing my voice to sound casual. She waved over her shoulder without turning back, already out the door. As soon as I heard her car pull away, I grabbed my keys and followed. Jake's car wasn't hard to find. It was parked in a secluded lot near the old industrial park, a place I recognized immediately. Back when we were closer friends, Jake and I used to hang out there, shooting the breeze and watching the sunset over the abandoned warehouses. It was the kind of place no one went unless they had a reason to hide. My stomach churned as I pulled into a spot far enough away that I wouldn't be seen. From where I parked, I had a clear view of Jake's car. Sure enough, Emily was sitting in the passenger seat, her body angled toward him as they talked. At first, I couldn't hear anything. I cracked my window slightly and strained to catch snippets of their conversation, but all I got was muffled laughter and the occasional movement. Emily was twirling her hair, something she always did when she was flirting. Jake leaned in close, his hand resting on the center console. I told myself to wait, to stay calm, but my patience didn't last long. Then they gave me the proof I needed. Jake leaned back in his seat, gesturing toward the back of the car. Emily laughed and nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt and climbing into the back seat. He followed her a moment later, shutting the door behind him. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They didn't even have the decency to pretend this was just a driving lesson. For a moment, I considered storming up to the car, yanking the door open, and confronting them right then and there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that I still didn't fully believe what I was seeing. Or maybe it was the realization that I needed more than my word against theirs. So instead, I pulled out my phone. I snapped a few pictures of Jake's car with them clearly in the back seat. The windows were slightly fogged, but their silhouettes were unmistakable. I recorded a short video, zooming in on the license plate to remove any doubt about whose car it was. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but I knew I had what I needed. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. I didn't stick around to watch them finish whatever they were doing. The sight of their betrayal was already burned into my mind, and I couldn't take it anymore. I drove back home, my head spinning with anger, disbelief, and a sick sense of finality. They'd crossed the line they couldn't uncross. That evening, Emily came home as if nothing had happened. She walked in with a cheery smile, kissed me on the cheek, and casually mentioned how productive her lesson had been. I played along, pretending I hadn't just watched her crawl into the back seat of my friend's car. I smiled, nodded, and asked what she wanted for dinner. Inside, though, I was already planning my next move. Because if they thought they were going to keep this hidden, they were in for a rude awakening. I barely slept that night. My mind raced as I replayed every moment, the texts, the sneaking around, the scene in Jake's car. I wanted answers. No more sneaking, no more pretending. The next morning, I decided it was time. I'd had enough of the lies. Emily had a day off, so she was lounging on the couch in her pajamas, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. The sight of her so calm and comfortable, while I was burning inside, made my anger bubble over. "Emily," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She looked up, surprised. "Yeah? We need to talk." Her expression shifted immediately. She set her phone down and crossed her legs, giving me a wary look. "About what?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "About Jake. And your driving lessons. And what you were really doing yesterday." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked it with a confused frown. "What are you talking about? I told you, we were practicing parallel parking." "Cut the crap, Emily," I snapped, unable to hold back anymore. "I know about the texts. I know about the back seat of Jake's car. I followed you yesterday, and I saw everything." The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but I stopped her with a single look. "Don't bother," I said coldly. "I have photos. Videos. I know exactly what's been going on, so don't even think about lying to me." Emily's face crumpled. "I can explain," she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Explain what?" That you've been sneaking around with my friend? That you've been lying to my face for weeks? That you've been making a fool out of me while you hook up in his car? What exactly is there to explain, Emily?" She broke down then, covering her face with her hands as she started to sob. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out between gasps. "I swear I didn't. It just happened." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened? What, you tripped and fell into his back seat? Don't insult me, Emily. I deserve better than your excuses." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. I'd spent too many sleepless nights trying to convince myself I was imagining things, too many days ignoring the gut feeling that something was wrong. Now that I knew the truth, her tears felt like a performance. "I trusted you," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? With lies and betrayal? I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just… I don't know. I was confused, and Jake, he was there for me in a way you haven't been lately. You're always so busy, and I felt alone." Her words stung, but they didn't excuse what she'd done. "You felt alone?" I repeated, my voice rising. "So your solution was to sleep with my friend? To destroy our relationship and my friendship all at once? If you felt alone, you could have talked to me. But instead you chose this." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I know I messed up," she said desperately. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I do. Please don't let this ruin us." I shook my head, unable to even look at her. "You already ruined us, Emily. You and Jake. You destroyed everything we had, and for what? A fling? A little excitement?" She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said firmly. "I can't do this right now. I need time to think. And I think you need to pack your things." Her sobs turned into cries of desperation, but I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there before I said something I couldn't take back. After walking out, I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Emily wasn't the only one who had destroyed my trust. Jake needed to answer for what he'd done too. I parked at the edge of the industrial park, the same place where I'd seen them together the day before. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed Jake's number. He picked up after a couple of rings. "Hey, man! What's up?" he said, his voice annoyingly casual. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. Sure. About what?" "You know what," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Meet me at the park. The one by the field. 20 minutes. Another pause. Then, "Yeah, okay." I hung up without another word and drove straight to the park. My heart was pounding as I sat in my car, waiting for him to show up. I stared out at the empty playground, the swings creaking softly in the wind. This place used to be a source of happy memories. Laughing with Jake, kicking a soccer ball around, talking about life. Now, it felt tainted. Jake pulled up a few minutes later, stepping out of his car with his usual cocky grin. It made me sick to my stomach. How could he look so confident when he knew what he'd done? "What's this about?" he asked as he approached, hands stuffed in his pockets. I stepped out of my car and walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Don't play dumb, Jake. I know about you and Emily." His grin faltered, and for a moment, I thought I saw panic flash across his face. But then, just as quickly, he composed himself. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said with a shrug. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "Don't lie to me. I saw you yesterday. In your car. With her." Jake's face turned red, and he looked down at the ground, scuffing the dirt with his shoe. "Look, man, I didn't mean for it to happen, okay? It just did." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I snapped. Is that your excuse? You didn't mean to betray me, your friend? You didn't mean to sleep with my girlfriend behind my back? He raised his hands defensively. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I interrupted, stepping closer. You knew exactly what you were doing. You even texted her about keeping it a secret from me. Don't act like this was some accident, Jake. You made a choice. Both of you did. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, okay. I messed up. I messed up big time. But dude, it's not like I was trying to hurt you. It just happened. I laughed bitterly. There it is again. It just happened. What, do you think that makes it better? Do you think that excuses the fact that you destroyed my relationship and our friendship? Jake looked at me, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. I don't know what you want me to say, man. I can't undo it. I can't change what happened. All I can do is say I'm sorry. Sorry? I repeated, my voice rising. You think sorry is going to fix this? You think that's enough? He didn't answer. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. You know what, Jake? I don't even care anymore. You're not worth it. You're a liar and a coward, and you're not my friend. You're nothing to me. His face fell, and for the first time, he looked genuinely remorseful. But it was too late. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the middle of the park, alone. When I got back to the apartment, it felt like walking into a ghost town. The lights were dim, the air heavy, and the once cozy place we shared now felt like a stranger's space. Her suitcase was by the door, only half packed, with clothes spilling out like a visual representation of the chaos we'd fallen into. Her favorite hoodie lay crumpled on the floor, one I'd bought her during a trip to the mountains. It used to remind me of happy times. Now, it was just a reminder of everything that was broken. Emily was sitting on the couch, knees pulled up to her chest, staring blankly at the TV. The screen flickered with the Netflix menu, but the sound was muted. She didn't even look at me when I walked in. It was like she was bracing for the inevitable. You talked to him, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I shut the door behind me and tossed my keys onto the counter. They clattered loudly in the silence, making her flinch. Yeah, I said flatly. I talked to Jake. I told him what I'm about to tell you, this is over. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide and already brimming with tears. No, she said quickly, her voice breaking. She slid off the couch and stood in front of me, her hands clasped tightly together. Please don't say that. Don't throw us away. I know I messed up. No, I ruined everything, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't leave me like this. Her words hit me like a wave, but not in the way she wanted. They felt hollow, like a last-ditch attempt to save herself. I stared at her, trying to feel something other than the icy anger that had settled in my chest. You think I'm throwing us away? I said bitterly, my voice rising slightly. Emily, you threw us away the moment you started sneaking around with Jake. Every time you lied to my face, every time you walked out that door pretending you were just going to a driving lesson, you tore us apart. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she fell back onto the couch. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I swear I didn't. I don't even know why I did it. I was lonely, okay? I felt like you didn't care anymore. You're always working, always distracted. I felt invisible. Invisible? I repeated, the word like acid in my mouth. So your solution to feeling invisible was to destroy everything we built? To crawl into the backseat of my friend's car? That's how you fix things, Emily? By betraying me? She sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands. I don't know, she choked out. I wasn't thinking. I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I love you so much, and I can't lose you. The word love felt like a dagger to the chest. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You love me? That's rich. You don't do this to someone you love. You don't sneak around, lie, and laugh with someone else about keeping it a secret. Love doesn't survive without trust, Emily, and you destroyed that. Completely. She slid onto her knees in front of me, her hands reaching for mine. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please, just give me a chance. One chance. I'll prove to you that I can be better. That I can fix this. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. I couldn't bear to let her hands close around mine. It felt like letting her chain me to the pain she'd caused. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice low and steady. This isn't just about the cheating. It's about every choice you made leading up to it, every lie you told to cover it up, and every moment you thought I wouldn't notice. This isn't something you can just fix. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her chest heaving. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. I can't lose you. I sighed deeply, trying to push back the mix of anger and sadness threatening to spill over. You already lost me, Emily, I said. The moment you decided Jake was worth more than our relationship, you lost me. Her sobs filled the silence, but I was too drained to care. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Pack your things, I said without looking back. When I get back tomorrow, I want you gone. Her cries grew louder as I opened the door, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The door clicked shut behind me, and with it, I felt like I'd closed the door on 3 years of my life. The moment I stepped out of the apartment, the weight of everything came crashing down. The air was colder than I expected, sharp against my skin, and it matched the heaviness in my chest. I didn't have a plan or a destination, I just walked, hoping the motion would stop my mind from spinning. It didn't. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream I couldn't wake up from. Memories of Emily flooded my mind, the way she used to laugh at my stupid jokes, the late-night talks on our tiny balcony, her warm smile when we'd talk about the future. Now, every memory felt tainted. I ended up at a small park a few blocks away, one we'd gone to together countless times. I found a bench near the empty swings and sat down, staring at nothing in particular. The place was eerily quiet, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I replayed everything in my head, the text I found, the betrayal in Jake's car, Emily's tearful pleas earlier that evening. It all churned in my mind, relentless and unforgiving. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. When did it start? How could they do this to me? Why wasn't I enough? Deep down, I knew there were no good answers, but the questions wouldn't stop. I tried to convince myself that this wasn't my fault. Emily and Jake made their choices. They betrayed me, not the other way around. But no matter how much I repeated it in my head, the sting of betrayal didn't fade. I pulled out my phone, not sure what I wanted to do. There was no one I wanted to talk to, no one who could say anything to make this better. I scrolled aimlessly through my contacts until I landed on Kyle's name. He was my closest friend outside of Jake, the one person I could trust to just let me exist without pushing me for answers. Can I crash at your place tonight? Need to clear my head. His reply came almost immediately. Of course, man. Doors unlocked. Everything okay? I stared at the screen for a moment, debating how much to say. Finally I typed, I'll tell you later. Thanks. It was a short walk to Kyle's apartment. He lived alone, and the familiar sight of his building brought a small sense of relief. At least here, I wouldn't have to face Emily's suitcase or her tearful apologies. Kyle was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting on his couch with a beer in hand and a football game on the TV. His usual easygoing grin faded the moment he saw my face. Damn, dude. You look like hell. Want to talk about it? Not right now, I muttered, dropping my bag near the door. I just need to not think for a while. He nodded, handing me a beer from the 6-pack on the coffee table. Fair enough. You know where everything is. Make yourself at home. That's what I appreciated about Kyle. He didn't push. He didn't try to fix things or force me to open up before I was ready. We sat in silence for a while, watching the game. He made the occasional comment about the score or a bad play, and I nodded along, not really paying attention. The distraction was nice, but it didn't last long. Every time there was a lull, my thoughts went right back to Emily and Jake. How could they do this to me? When Kyle finally went to bed, I stretched out on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet, but my thoughts were deafening. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Emily laughing at Jake's jokes, her crawling into the back seat of his car, the texts filled with flirty emojis and whispered plans. It was like a nightmare on repeat. I thought about Emily's tearful pleas earlier. She'd said she loved me, that she wanted to fix things. But how could I believe her? Every word she'd said felt hollow, like she was clinging to the idea of us rather than actually caring about what she'd done. Then there was Jake. The anger I felt toward him was a whole other beast. This wasn't just some stranger who had crossed the line, this was someone I considered a brother. We'd been through so much together, and he threw it all away without a second thought. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up, half expecting it to be Emily, but it wasn't. It was Jake. "Look, man, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I screwed up. Big time. I hope one day you'll be able to move on." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. The nerve of him, acting like a simple apology could fix this. I deleted the message without replying. Emily had called earlier, too. I hadn't listened to her voicemails yet, but the notifications were there, mocking me. I put my phone on silent and tossed it aside, deciding I didn't have the energy to deal with her pleas. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking. Every time I felt like I was calming down, the memories would creep back in, clawing at my sanity. By the time the sun started to rise, I felt completely drained. I didn't know what the next step was, but one thing was certain: Emily had to leave. As for Jake, that conversation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented. Kyle's couch was comfortable enough, but my body felt like it had been through a war. I dragged myself to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the guy looking back at me, eyes red and puffy, jaw clenched tight, like I was bracing for another hit that hadn't come yet. When I walked into the kitchen, Kyle was already up, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. He gave me a nod. "Morning. You look rough," I grunted, grabbing the cup he'd poured for me. "I feel worse." Kyle watched me carefully as I took a sip. He wasn't one to pry, but I could see the questions bubbling beneath the surface. Finally, he spoke. "You want to tell me what happened, or are we doing the silent brooding thing for a while?" I exhaled slowly, setting my cup down. The words felt heavy as they tumbled out. "Emily cheated on me." Kyle's eyebrows shot up. "What? No way. Are you serious?" "With Jake," I added, my voice tight. That wiped the usual smirk off his face. "Wait, Jake? As in your Jake? Work buddy, beers after work Jake?" "Yeah," I said, the bitterness seeping into my tone. "That Jake." Kyle let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Man, that's messed up. I don't even know what to say." "Neither do I," I admitted, leaning against the counter. "I found out a couple of days ago. Caught them sneaking around, found texts. I even saw them together." Kyle's face darkened. "That's brutal. So what now? Did you confront them?" "Both of them," I said. "Told Emily we're done. Told Jake he's dead to me. She's supposed to be out of the apartment by the time I get back." Kyle nodded, but his expression was unreadable. "Good. She doesn't deserve to stay after that. And Jake? Man, if I were you, I'd have punched him in the face." "Trust me, I thought about it," I said, my hands tightening around the coffee mug. "But what's the point? It's not going to undo anything. He's not worth it." Kyle tilted his head, considering that. "Fair enough. But still, that's low, man. Both of them. You didn't deserve that. His words hit me harder than I expected. It was something I hadn't let myself believe yet. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thanks. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Kyle didn't push me to talk anymore, and I was grateful for the space. After lunch, I finally worked up the nerve to head back to the apartment. I wasn't sure what I'd find when I got there. Part of me expected to walk into a disaster. Emily's still there, her suitcase untouched, more tears and begging. But when I opened the door, the place was eerily silent. Her suitcase was gone. The pile of clothes and toiletries was cleaned up, and the apartment was back to its usual tidy state. The only sign she'd ever been there was the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air. I walked through each room, half expecting to find some forgotten piece of her, a hair tie on the bathroom counter, a stray sock under the bed. But she was thorough. It was like she'd never existed in the first place. On the kitchen counter there was a note. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Her handwriting was shaky, like she'd been crying while she wrote it. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly sorry. For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, I don't think I deserve it, but I need you to know that I regret every decision that hurt you. You didn't deserve this. You've always been good to me, and I threw it away. I'll never stop hating myself for that. Goodbye, Emily. I folded the note carefully and set it back on the counter. Her words didn't move me the way she probably hoped they would. I wasn't angry anymore, not in that searing, blinding way I had been before. I just felt hollow. Emily was gone, but the damage she and Jake caused wasn't. That betrayal didn't just vanish with her suitcase. It would take time to figure out how to move forward, but for now, I stood in the quiet of my apartment, letting the emptiness sink in. For the next couple of days, I focused on getting through the motions. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Kyle checked in occasionally, offering beers and bad jokes to lift my spirits, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to move on yet. Every time I thought about Jake, the anger surged back, burning through the numbness. It wasn't enough that I'd confronted him. He deserved consequences, real ones. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just let him walk away from this unscathed. Jake hadn't just ruined my relationship, he trashed my trust, humiliated me, and acted like he was untouchable. He texted me an apology, and probably thought that was enough to wash his hands of the situation. It wasn't. So, I started to plan. The first thing I did was gather everything I had, screenshots of Emily's texts with Jake, the photos and videos I'd taken of them together, and even a log of every time she'd mentioned him in her fake driving lesson stories. It wasn't just about holding on to the evidence, it was about building a case. Jake worked with me, after all, and his actions weren't just morally wrong, they could have professional consequences. As a driving instructor, he wasn't supposed to cross certain lines with his clients. I wasn't sure if it was enough to get him fired, but it was worth a shot. When I felt like I had enough, I reached out to our mutual friend, Marcus. He wasn't as close to Jake as I had been, but he'd known both of us for years. I figured he'd want to know the truth, especially since Jake's behavior had probably affected more than just me. I invited Marcus over one evening, told him I needed to talk. He showed up with his usual energy, all smiles and jokes, but when he saw my expression, the mood shifted. "What's up, man?" Marcus asked, setting a six-pack on the counter. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." I motioned for him to sit down at the dining table. "It's about Jake." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What about him? Did he finally quit fantasy football? Because that guy is trash at picking a lineup." "It's not about football," I said, shaking my head. "It's serious. I found out he's been hooking up with Emily." His smile vanished instantly. "Wait, what? You're Emily? Jake? No way." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots of the texts. Then, the video of Jake and Emily together in his car. Marcus leaned forward, his face darkening as he scrolled through the evidence. "Holy crap," he muttered. This is insane." I can't believe he'd do something like this. To you, of all people. Believe it, I said flatly. And that's not even the worst part. He was doing all of this while pretending to be my friend. Acting like he had my back. Marcus looked up, his jaw clenched. What do you want to do about it? Because I'm not letting this slide. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. First, I want people to know who he really is. I'm done covering for him or pretending he's a decent guy. He betrayed me, and he deserves to face the fallout. Marcus nodded slowly. You're right. He can't just get away with this. But how far are you willing to go? As far as it takes, I said, my voice cold. We spent the next hour talking strategy. Marcus was as furious as I was, and he had some ideas of his own, like quietly letting Jake's boss know about his inappropriate relationship with a client. It wasn't vindictive, it was just the truth. By the time Marcus left, I felt more focused than I had in days. I wasn't going to let this consume me, but I also wasn't going to let Jake walk away without consequences. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. The next day at work, I put my plan into motion. Jake and I worked at the same company, though in different departments, which made things tricky. Running into him in the break room or during meetings was almost inevitable, and the thought of seeing his smug face made my blood boil. But I stayed calm. I had to if I wanted this to work. First, I reached out to HR. Not with the full story, not yet. I phrased it as a general concern, asking if there were policies in place regarding inappropriate relationships between employees or clients outside of work. The HR rep sounded confused but assured me that while they didn't police personal relationships, any conduct that created conflicts of interest or risked the company's reputation could be investigated. Perfect. Next, I sent an anonymous tip to the driving school where Jake worked part-time. I attached the screenshots of his texts with Emily and added a note. One of your instructors is engaging in unprofessional behavior with his client. This not only compromises the integrity of your lessons but also puts the company at risk. It wasn't long before I saw the consequences starting to unfold. Jake's car wasn't in its usual spot when I arrived at work the next morning. That wasn't too unusual, but the absence felt different. A couple of hours later, I overheard a conversation between two coworkers near the coffee machine. Did you hear about Jake? One of them whispered. No. What happened? He called out sick. Heard from Marcus it might be something big, like HR's involved or something. I smirked quietly to myself as I poured my coffee. The trap was working. By lunchtime, the tension in the office was palpable. Jake's absence had sparked curiosity, but no one seemed to know the full story yet. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, pretending to be just as in the dark as everyone else. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that I got a text from Marcus. Marcus. Bro, Jake's spiraling. He just called me, freaking out about some complaint. What did you do? I stared at the screen, my smirk fading. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but there was also a weight in my chest. As angry as I was, Jake's panic reminded me of the friendship we once had. But I couldn't let that stop me now. I did what needed to be done. He's not my problem anymore. Marcus. Fair. Just thought you'd want to know he's sweating bullets. I'll keep my distance. As the day wore on, I got word from a mutual contact at the driving school. Jake had been called into a meeting with his boss earlier that day. Apparently, the anonymous tip had hit hard. The texts were undeniable proof of unprofessional conduct, and Jake had been placed under review. The fallout wasn't just professional, though. Word was spreading among our friends, thanks to Marcus. He hadn't outright exposed Jake, but he'd let enough slip that people were starting to put the pieces together. By the time I left work, my phone was buzzing with messages from people asking what was going on. I ignored most of them, but one caught my eye. Jake, you've made your point. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore him completely, to let him stew in the mess he'd created. But another part of me wanted to confront him one last time, to make sure he understood just how badly he'd messed up. Finally, I typed out a reply. Meet me at the park tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late. The next day, I arrived at the park 10 minutes early. The same park where I'd confronted Jake before. It was quiet, the early afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. The playground was empty except for a lone swing swaying gently in the breeze. I stood near the bench where we used to sit and talk, memories flickering in my mind. Back then, this was a place of laughter and friendship. Now, it felt like a battlefield. Jake showed up right on time. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled, and his usual confident swagger replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He stopped a few feet away from me, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally I said, "What do you want, Jake?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I know I screwed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to hear me out. Please." "Hear you out?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "You think there's anything you can say that'll make this better? That'll undo what you did?" "No," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "But I need to explain. Not for me, well, okay, maybe a little for me, but mostly for you. You deserve to know the truth." I raised an eyebrow. "The truth? What part of the truth do I not already know, Jake? That you betrayed me? Slept with my girlfriend? Lied to my face?" He flinched at my words but didn't back down. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I swear. It started as nothing, just helping Emily with her driving, like you asked me to. But then, I don't know. We started talking more. She was upset about some things, said she felt like you were distant. I should have shut it down right there, but I didn't." "No, you didn't," I said coldly. "You let it happen. You encouraged it." "I know," he said quickly. "I know I messed up. I didn't think it would go as far as it did. I was stupid, and I was selfish. I let my feelings cloud everything. I betrayed you, and I betrayed myself." I laughed bitterly. "Your feelings? Is that what this is about? You thought your feelings justified destroying my relationship? My trust?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing justifies what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to face you. To own up to it." "Own up to it?" I repeated, stepping closer. "Jake, the only reason you're owning up to anything is because you got caught. If I hadn't found those texts, you'd still be sneaking around behind my back." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was a coward. I still am. But I'm trying to be better." "Better?" I scoffed. "You think one apology and a little guilt makes you better? You burned this bridge, Jake. And there's no rebuilding it." He nodded slowly, his face grim. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect us to ever be friends again, but I needed to say it to your face." For a moment, I just stared at him. Part of me wanted to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But another part of me was just done. "Apology accepted," I said finally, my voice flat. "But it doesn't change anything. We're done, Jake. Don't contact me again." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but I turned and walked away before he could. As I left the park, a strange sense of finality settled over me. The anger and betrayal were still there, but for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. This chapter of my life was over. Walking away from Jake that day felt like closing a door I'd been holding open for too long. I didn't look back, and I didn't plan to. For the first time in days, I wasn't consumed by the need to confront or prove a point. It was over. He was out of my life, and so was Emily. But letting go wasn't as simple as walking away. When I got back to the apartment, it still felt empty without Emily's presence. Her scent still lingered faintly in the air, and there were small reminders of her everywhere. A throw blanket she'd picked out, the coffee mug she used every morning, even the playlists we used to play while cooking dinner. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at it all, unsure of what to do next. Eventually, I started cleaning. Not just the usual tidying up, I mean really cleaning. I scrubbed the counters, rearranged the furniture, and boxed up everything that reminded me of her. The blanket, the mug, the framed photo of us at the beach. I shoved it all into a storage bin and stuck it in the back of the closet. It wasn't much, but it helped. Later that evening, Kyle came over with pizza and a six-pack. He didn't say much at first, just handed me a slice and cracked open a beer. We sat on the couch, the silence between us comfortable. "So," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "How'd it go with Jake?" I took a sip of my beer, letting the carbonation settle before answering. "He apologized. Said he was sorry, that he didn't expect forgiveness. I told him we're done and walked away." Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good. He doesn't deserve your time, man. You're better off without him." "I know," I said. "It's just… I don't know. I thought I'd feel better, you know? Like walking away would fix everything. But it doesn't." Kyle leaned back, resting his beer on his knee. "It's not gonna feel better right away. You don't just get over betrayal like that. It's like ripping off a bandage. It stings, but it's the first step toward healing." "Yeah," I muttered. "I guess." Kyle slapped my shoulder lightly. "You'll get through this. You've already taken the hardest steps, cutting them both out of your life. Now you just have to focus on yourself for a while. Find what makes you happy." I wanted to believe him, but it felt like happiness was a distant concept, something I couldn't reach yet. The next few days were tough. I avoided social media, not wanting to see any posts that might remind me of Jake or Emily. I even considered deleting my accounts altogether, but that felt too dramatic. Instead, I unfollowed both of them and adjusted my feed to show only things that brought me even the tiniest bit of joy: sports highlights, travel photos, and memes. One night, while scrolling aimlessly, I got a notification. It was from an old college friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, saw you've been quiet lately. Hope everything's okay. Let me know if you want to catch up sometime." It was a small gesture, but it reminded me that there were still people in my life who cared, people who hadn't betrayed me, people who would support me if I let them. I decided to take Kyle's advice. For the first time in years, I thought about what I wanted, not for Emily, not for anyone else, just for me. That weekend, I went for a long hike at a nearby trail I used to visit all the time. Being out in nature, away from the noise and chaos of the city, felt like hitting a reset button. I stood at the edge of a cliff, staring out at the sprawling view below, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. Maybe Kyle was right. Maybe this was the start of something new. After that hike, something shifted in me. It wasn't like the pain vanished overnight, but I started to feel more in control, less like the betrayal was running my life. For the first time in weeks, I began focusing on things that had nothing to do with Emily or Jake. Work was a good distraction. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for extra assignments and offering to help coworkers where I could. It wasn't about impressing anyone, I just needed to stay busy. When I got home at night, I felt tired in a good way, like I was finally moving forward instead of being stuck in the same cycle of anger and sadness. But it wasn't just about work. I started picking up old hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside. Photography had always been a passion of mine, but I hadn't touched my camera in over a year. One Saturday, I dusted it off and took it to a local park, snapping photos of anything that caught my eye: sunlight filtering through the trees, a bird perched on a branch, kids playing on the swings. It felt good. Like I was reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. Kyle noticed the change, too. "You're looking better, man," he said one night as we sat on my balcony, beers in hand. "Still hurts?" "Yeah," I admitted. "But not as much." I don't think about them every second anymore. He nodded. That's progress. You're doing the right thing, focusing on yourself, finding what makes you happy. That's how you heal. I wanted to believe him, and maybe I was starting to. A few weeks later, I decided to take a bigger step, getting out of town for a bit. I hadn't traveled since before Emily and I got together, and the idea of escaping felt like a breath of fresh air. I booked a weekend trip to a small mountain town a few hours away, rented a cozy cabin, and planned to spend the days hiking and taking photos. The drive there felt liberating. The farther I got from the city, the lighter I felt, like I was leaving all the heaviness behind me. When I arrived, the air was crisp and cool, and the cabin was exactly what I needed, quiet, with a view of the forest that stretched for miles. That weekend, I didn't think about Emily or Jake once. I hiked to a waterfall, cooked meals for myself, and sat on the porch at night, staring at the stars. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. On the last morning of the trip, I found myself journaling, a habit I hadn't kept since college. I wrote about how far I'd come, the anger I'd let go of, and the hope I was starting to feel for the future. I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. When I got back home, I noticed something else had changed. The apartment didn't feel so suffocating anymore. I'd rearranged things, filled the space with new energy, and turned it into something that felt like mine again. Even the silence didn't bother me. I still had moments where the past crept in, when I'd see something that reminded me of Emily, or when a mutual friend would casually bring up Jake without realizing the weight of his name. But those moments didn't derail me anymore. Because I was starting to rebuild. A couple of months later, life had settled into a rhythm. I wasn't fully healed, those kinds of scars take time, but I was moving forward. Work was steady, my weekends were filled with hikes and photography, and I even reconnected with a few old friends who reminded me what real support looked like. One Saturday, I decided to check out a new coffee shop that had opened downtown. I'd heard good things about their cold brew, and I figured it would be a nice way to start the day. The place was cozy, with exposed brick walls and shelves lined with books and plants. It was busy, but not overwhelming. I ordered my drink and found a small table by the window. Pulling out my laptop, I started editing some photos I'd taken the weekend before, a sunset over a lake, golden light reflecting off the water. It was peaceful, the perfect way to spend a quiet morning. And then I saw her. Emily. She walked in like she didn't have a care in the world, laughing at something the person next to her said. My stomach tightened, and for a moment, I considered packing up and leaving before she noticed me. But then I realized who she was with. It wasn't Jake. The guy was someone I didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that turned heads. He held the door open for her, and she smiled at him in that way she used to smile at me. I wasn't sure what I felt. It wasn't the gut punch of betrayal I'd experienced before. It wasn't anger either. It was more like indifference. She didn't see me at first, but as they waited in line, her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. Her smile faltered, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I could see the recognition in her expression, the way her body stiffened slightly as if bracing for something. But I didn't react. I just nodded politely and went back to my laptop, pretending I wasn't fazed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her hesitate, like she was debating whether or not to come over. The guy she was with seemed oblivious, scrolling through his phone as they moved up in line. Eventually, Emily turned her attention back to him, and they ordered their drinks. As they sat down on the other side of the cafe, I couldn't help but glance in their direction. She was laughing again, leaning in close to him, her hands wrapped around her mug. She looked happy. And to my surprise, I didn't care. Whatever Emily was doing now, whoever she was with, it wasn't my problem anymore. She was a chapter of my life that I'd closed, and seeing her didn't change that. I turned back to my laptop, finishing my edits and enjoying the rest of my coffee. When I left the cafe, I didn't look back. Walking out of that cafe felt like shedding an old layer of skin, one I didn't need anymore. Seeing Emily again, with someone new, didn't leave me spiraling like I might have a few months ago. If anything, it reinforced what I'd been slowly coming to realize: I was free. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had my life back. Over the next few weeks, I started saying yes to more things: an invitation to a coworker's game night, a friend's birthday party, even a local photography workshop. Each little step out of my comfort zone felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd let go during those years with Emily. One evening, Kyle texted me, "Local pub trivia night. You in?" Normally, I'd have found an excuse, but this time I replied, "Sure, why not?" The pub was packed when I arrived, the kind of lively crowd that used to intimidate me. Kyle waved me over to a table near the back, where he was sitting with a group of friends I didn't recognize. "This is the guy I was telling you about," Kyle said, clapping me on the back as I took a seat. "Our secret weapon for the geography questions." I laughed and introduced myself to the group. One of them, a woman named Lauren, caught my attention. She had this effortless confidence, the kind of energy that made you feel like you'd known her for years. Throughout the night, we found ourselves on the same wavelength, tossing out answers and laughing at each other's jokes. By the end of the evening, when our team somehow won, I realized I'd spend most of the night talking to her. As we were leaving, she turned to me with a smile. "This was fun. You should come out more often." I hesitated for a moment, then smiled back. "I think I will." Over the next few weeks, Lauren and I started hanging out more. It wasn't anything serious at first, just coffee here, a walk in the park there, but it felt easy. There were no pretenses, no games, just two people enjoying each other's company. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city skyline, she asked me about my photography. "It's been a lifesaver," I admitted, showing her some of my recent shots on my phone. "It's helped me stay grounded." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You talk about it like it's more than a hobby. Have you ever thought about doing something more with it?" I shrugged. "I've thought about it, but it always felt out of reach. Like something other people do, not me." "Well," she said, nudging me playfully, "maybe it's time to change that." Lauren's words stuck with me. Over the next few months, I started taking small steps toward turning my passion into something more. I created an online portfolio, started sharing my work on social media, and even booked a few small gigs, a local event, a friend's engagement shoot. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. As I poured more of myself into photography, I realized how much lighter I felt. The bitterness, the anger, the hurt, they weren't gone completely, but they didn't weigh me down like they used to. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. Looking back now, I see how much I've grown. The betrayal that once felt like the end of the world was really just the start of a new chapter. Losing Emily and Jake hurt, but it also taught me what I deserved, what I should demand from the people I let into my life. And now, as I stand here, camera in hand, ready to shoot my first solo exhibit at a local gallery, I finally feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.